Okay, today is Saturday. It's April 25th. And I want to talk some more about COVID-19. And are we less confused now about what's actually happening, or more confused, or something in between? It's been really interesting watching over the last few days. I'm definitely seeing a trend. And one of the trends is that the people that are suggesting high levels of mortality and imminent danger um, about this virus seem to be exaggerating. And the people that are underestimating the mortality and the danger seem to be exaggerating. And um, it's not clear to me whether they don't understand how epidemiology works or how to interpret the data and the numbers, or whether they have a bias, a built-in bias, intentionally or unintentionally. For the average person, if you're not a statistician, if you're not an epidemiologist studying the prevalence of a disease in a particular population, in a particular portion of the world or the world itself, you're at a disadvantage. So the other day, I was watching a news feed where the doctor being interviewed was saying ostensibly is that there are millions and millions and millions of positives and very, very, very small numbers of deaths. Lots and lots of positives, very, very small numbers of deaths. And that sounds good and that sounds encouraging. If you look at the data in one way, the current evidence seems to suggest that COVID-19 may in fact be not much more significant in terms of mortality, death, as the annual flu. And it may be true. The point is it's premature for us to just take that as a given. So again, today I'm going to bandy about a few numbers. I'm going to decide how exacting I'm going to be versus kind of general. But I had spoken before about what's called the positivity number versus the prevalence number. And let me review that again. And because people who are sharing data seem to be mixing and matching these indiscriminately, and it's not appropriate. And the other thing they're doing is they're taking percentages, and if you take a percentage and you convert it to a decimal or vice versa, if you have a percentage and you convert it to a decimal, you take the number and put two zeros behind it plus the point. And if you have that point and zeros in a number and say percent, then if you convert that to a decimal, you have to take two more zeros. So some of the people sharing data seem to be, again, indiscriminately kind of alternating between a decimal calculation versus a percent of a decimal calculation. And these become very different. So I don't want to intentionally confuse everybody, but I want to try to bring a level of clarity that I don't seem to see other folks doing. I seem to see their bias being, drawn into the equation, and I just want to share information. Um, and I want to again clarify how this information is just numbers. It's statistical, and you can interpret it in different ways with certain degrees of legitimacy. And so, we all have to step back from this process. But if we let's use New York as our prime example, where the highest incidence of cases have occurred. So we've got, let's see, what are we at? About 280,000 confirmed cases in New York, about 650,000 tested. And so if you look at the percentile of how many people are infected relative to the number of tests, we see that it's looks like that's somewhere over 30% of those tested, and that is what we call a positivity number. Those statistics are those numbers, calculations are true. Part of where the problem occurs is when you try to take positivity, which is the percentage of those who have been tested, and then try to extrapolate to the percentage of the population at large. So it's a subset, it's a sample. And obviously the larger that sample is, the larger the sample is, the more we can legitimately extrapolate what could be called prevalence. To truly get prevalence, which is the actual occurrence of infections, then you have to test a much, much larger population base. And again, initially we've been primarily testing people that are highly symptomatic. We've now started doing kind of random sets of people who are asymptomatic, looking at people working in nursing homes, for instance, and other just broad population groups. And in New York, for example, what we're seeing is about 1 in 5 of those tested seem to be testing positive. Not that they're symptomatic, just 1 in 5 are testing positive. So that's, 20%, 1 in 5, those being tested. Now, if we take that and extrapolate it to the 20 million population of New York, I mean, that gets us, I don't know what exactly the number of millions is, but I think it's something like 4.5 million of the 20 million, 5 million of the 20 million. But that's not legitimate. You can't say that positivity number, the 20%, the 1 in 5, can be then just extrapolated to the population at large. But a lot of people throwing numbers out there are using that and saying, well, look, that's what it is. So what happens is this: if we take current, 200 and let me use these numbers: 256,000 cases in New York out of 650,000. If you take the number of cases and calculate the percentage of deaths, 16,000 deaths at this point, that's about 6%. So death rate about 6%. That's going back to the World Health Organization's projections of 5%, above the 3.4% from China, way above the 0.5% from the White House. But that's if you calculate the percentage of deaths relative to the number of cases that have been confirmed. We know that that's grossly, though, underestimated. We don't know how much the deaths have been underestimated, although we know they have been underestimated. We know for sure the number of positives have been grossly underestimated, because we're still only testing about 1% of the entire population of the United States. We're trying to gear that up, but still it's like 1%. So what happens if you now recalculate this number, where you take the population of New York, 20 million, and 16,000 deaths is what percentage of that, and you come up with 0.08% mortality. Well, 6% mortality and 0.08% mortality, wow, those are really different. So which is true? And again, let me tell you, what I seem to be seeing is this trend that those who are exaggerating or overestimating are exaggerating, and those who are underestimating or exaggerating, I guess they want to drive their own bias. It's something in between. We don't know what the in between is at this stage. But the people who are doing the underestimating, and I suspect that they may be more toward an accurate phase than the other side, but it still has some problems that we need to take a step back and kind of, reflect on. They take, let me, give this other example. Let's look at Sweden versus Norway. So Sweden is the country that has basically done little to no social distancing, or there's a little kind of some people using masks, no mandate in any way, and so 15,000 confirmed cases, 74,000 tests. So 15 of 74, that's 20%. If you were to say that then 20% of the 10.4 million population that could be said to be positive, because that's converting positivity to prevalence, it's not true. I mean, it could be true, but we don't know that it's true because we don't have a large of a cross-section test yet. But if you take the current number of deaths in Sweden, almost 1,800, and calculate what percentage of the positive cases, 15,000, then the mortality rate in Sweden is 12%. 12%! I mean, that's more than double the World Health Organization. That suggests a lot of numbers could be coming down the pike. But we know that's just absolutely false. We know it's false because you can't take the positivity number and translate it to prevalence and come out with something meaningful. But the people who are underestimating, they're taking the 1,800 deaths and dividing it, figuring out what percentage of the entire population of Sweden, that is 10.4 million. So that makes the mortality rate 0.02%. Yay! Wow! I mean, 12% versus 0.02%. Which one of those is it? I mean, they're actually both accurate pieces of information within the context of the way you calculate it. It's just a matter of then where do you go with that. So their neighbor Norway, that has been in a lockdown. So 145,000 tests and about 7,000 positive cases, and so if you take their number of deaths, 182, with the lockdown, and what percentage of the 7,000 cases is that? It's 2.5%. So the positivity rate in Norway, where they're locking down, is 2.5%. The positivity rate in Sweden, where they're not locking down, is 12%. Is the difference between 2.5% and 12% statistically relevant? You bet. I mean, the doctor's newsfeed that I was listening to that was sharing this information was saying that the statistical deviation between Sweden and Norway was meaningless, completely insignificant, meaningless. Well, 2.5% and 12% is not a meaningless differential. And if we look at that calculation relative to the percentage based on the total population. So again, it isn't actually real, but the numbers are real. We just have to be careful about what we think it means. So in Sweden, 1,800 deaths in a 10.4 million population. What's the percentage of mortality? 0.02. 0.02 versus 12% based on how you do the calculation and how you decide to interpret the data. In Norway, if you take the 182 and figure out what percentage of their population, which is 5.4 million, it's 0.003%. So again, statistically is 0.02 compared to 0.003%, statistically relevant. Absolutely it is. You're talking about, at least a fivefold differential increase where you're not doing anything versus lockdown. Now, the individual saying that is not significant. So the difference is instead of 1,800 deaths in Sweden, it could be fivefold relative to Norway 182. You're talking maybe more towards 10,000. 2,000 people die, 10,000 people die. That's not a lot in a country. That's not a lot. But they're deaths, nonetheless. They are deaths. And the annual flu, between 15 on the low end, 60-some thousand on the high end, annually. We've never had a panic. We've never had a lockdown. We've never virtually decimated our economy or the world economy to protect us from the flu. So how much more dangerous is COVID? Is it really more dangerous? And so one of the complicating issues, it's a novel virus, meaning new. We have SARS-1, this is SARS-2. Are there other historical SARS-CoV viruses? Yeah, they're still relatively novel. So we don't have a lot of epidemiology. We don't have a lot of immunity. We don't have a lot of herd exposure to this to create immunity. We just don't know how virulent this is. We don't know where the next curve will be if we stop social distancing. It could be, again, that we've hit the top and we're just coming down. It could be that we've hit a plateau and we're about to spike again, and we don't know. So, should we be, really fixated on the social distancing and washing hands and wearing masks? I've suggested earlier that it's definitely flattening the curve. It's a catch-22 because as we avoid each other, there's no question that we bring down the prevalence and incidence and mortality. But we're also then not creating immunity. So when we start getting back together again, whether we do it slowly or quickly or in a short window of time or a longer window of time, we're kind of right back where we started. The suggestion is a vaccine, would kind of accelerate that immunity vector, and that's speculation too. We don't know how effective a vaccine will or won't be. Traditional annual flu vaccines, a lot of because of the mutating characteristic of flus, has a 40 to 6% efficacy rate. I've said this before. Is the COVID vaccine going to be any more effective than that? Really not likely. So it's not like it's going to be the magic that just solves things. And then we still have this, deeper problem. So I'm not trying to confuse the issue. I'm just hopefully trying to bring more clarity. I think it's particularly relevant and meaningful that in the last few days that the price of oil, if any of you have been just kind of watching mainstream news, you know that oil for the first time in known history, the very first time in history of the existence of the petroleum industry in the United States, that a barrel of crude has gone to negative $37 a barrel. What do you mean negative? I mean negative. I mean that the metal barrel is worth more than the oil in the barrel. Wow. Um, and I think this is part of the wake-up call. I think this is part of the deeper vision of what's going on. I don't think it's a coincidence, because the problem here is not this virus and social distancing and washing our hands and wearing masks, and then getting everything back to normal. We are at a cusp on our planet. It's an environmental cusp. We need to start to be more responsible. It's really interesting that Michael Moore and a colleague of his has just come out with a new documentary movie about the environment. And the theme they're talking about is how that the renewable resources, that solar, wind, geothermal, these things, aren't just automatically a magic panacea. I mean, I said in an earlier video that we have the technology for solar to supply all the energy of the planet, and it's true. But there is an issue here that is relevant, and that is, we know that currently that that solar, wind, and water technologies do require non-renewable resources to make them. Like lithium-ion batteries, dependent on lithium, which is a rare earth element, and it's limited supply. So, I mean, something has to change. We do have to improve the technology. We've got to be motivated, though, to do that. We should be highly motivated to do that. I think we have the infrastructure and the ability, and there are many that suggest, and I suspect they're right, that we've broken through this technology barrier, but it's not mainstream information or knowledge at the present time. But it's due, and so we need to step into our own future, which hasn't happened yet, and stop projecting the negative outcomes on ourselves or others, even though they're based on good statistical facts, and hold the space of being unconditional, and allowing us to be responsible. I mean, the solution isn't merely that we're unconditional and then all things will be well. The axiom I like to share is a kind of a spiritual principle. Trust in God, but tie your camel too. Tie your camel. Don't just let it roam. That God will bring it to you. No. We have to, open our hearts and clear our heads to spiritual guidance and directive. And then we need to be responsible and mindful, and use our brain and emotions and our capacities to solve problems. There's a balance here. It's a balance, and we need to dance within the natural equilibrium phase of this process. So thank you again. If again you like this information, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and share it and like it and share it and share it. Because I hope to bring ongoing, continuing clarity to the story of what's going on with COVID-19 and what's going on with life and the nature of things. So thank you very much.